What's up everyone, I'm the CloakingDonkey and today we are going to look at the crafting in Camelot Unchained. Now as before, please do remember that this game is still in alpha and has not reached its beta status, so everything I say could very much change before the game launches. So please keep that in mind and don't get super angry if something I say in this video didn't actually come to pass in the future. So crafting is supposed to be one of the core features of Camelot Unchained. And as such, I'm not going to be able to cover all of it in one video because I really want to go into detail as much as possible. And so we are going to do at least 2, maybe even 3 videos on crafting. So that's going to be the near future 2 to 3 videos, just so you know. Crafting in Camelot Unchained is definitely not a side activity. Let's face it, in the last 12 or so years, basically ever since World of Warcraft launched, crafting has really taken a backseat in a lot of MMORPGs. There are some that try to make it something better. Guild Wars 2 was talking about making it something fancy, but in my opinion, in the end it really didn't turn out very different from World of Warcraft. And the same goes for Elder Scrolls Online. Elder Scrolls Online definitely pushed the envelope a little bit, but in the end it just kind of ended up still being the same, the only difference really being that the items that you ended up crafting were worth something, unlike World of Warcraft where pretty much everything you craft is worth less than a dog turd. In fact, crafting in Camelot Unchained is planned to be so involved that crafting is its own class. That is right, every one of the 3 factions have their own crafting class. And these crafting classes are dedicated crafters who do all of the advanced crafting. Now that doesn't mean that if you are, say, a blackguard, you have really nothing to craft at all. There certainly are minor or basic crafting things that pretty much every character can pick up, such as field repairing, crafting arrows, basic construction on buildings, mining, gathering, and farming. What really differentiates the crafting classes in what they can craft is their use of the Vox Megas. And I'm going to go more in depth on the Vox Megas in the second video, but the Vox Megas is basically a magical sort of crafting station. Basically, they have embraced magic as the way of crafting. So it's not really that you are smithing or you are a leather worker. You are a magician who creates all of these items with magic, basically, by shaping raw materials through a magical particle bombardment into shapes that you can then turn into a sword. Whereas the basic crafting, gathering, and constructing isn't really all that magical and is more physical, and as such, everybody can do it without having to have any knowledge of this arcane Vox Megas construct thingy. Crafters are definitely not combat classes, however. Just like the scouts, they have a special role in this game that basically puts them outside of the basic sort of PvP game where everybody is fighting each other in small scale or in big scale battles, in zergs, in sieges, and all of that. However, you do have a role within the PvP, even as a crafter, because crafters will be able to build and set up traps for enemies, they will be able to construct siege engines much more efficiently, and, well, they will also be able to set up much better siege engines than other characters, and they will of course have to construct the initial pieces, or at least the blueprints for these siege engines, and they will also be able to reinforce keep doors and walls. And I'm pretty sure they're probably also going to be able to operate siege equipment. And so they have their role. It is just outside of I hit you with sword. It is more of a supportive role in PvP, just like the scouts, who are also not supposed to shank people in the neck. Instead, they are supposed to look at stuff and figure things out and report back to their groups and their guilds and lay traps and cause mischief and all of that sort of good stuff. But just like with everything else, we will get to the scouts in another video. The 2 basic goals of having crafters be their own class and making them non-combatants, if you will, is to have more of an interaction between combat classes and crafting during both PvP and outside of PvP. Because when crafters go and get materials, or even if they just build a farm somewhere, they're going to need combatants to protect them from enemy combatants. Or when combatants want to ambush or trap an enemy group, or if they want to siege a castle, they need the help of the crafters to support their efforts. The other goal is to give everyone The other goal is to give crafters who have been so let down over the past decade a crafting system that is tailored towards them. Sure, popcorn, side activity, fun crafting for combatants should still exist, and it does still exist, which is something I'll get to later, but the core crafting experience should be tailored to those who actually enjoy playing crafters pretty much full time. And by making crafting such a big deal that it actually entails an entire character class, I think they really do have a good chance of achieving a crafting system that is for crafters primarily. There are 6 basic parts to the crafting system: taking, purifying, shaping, making, repairing, and breaking. Taking is basically resource acquisition, and this really isn't anything new. There's going to be mining and skinning and probably herbalism, but something that doesn't exist in too many games, there's also going to be logging. You will be able to fell trees, and there's also going to be farming where you will be able to grow your own crops. Probably, if I had to make an educated guess, it's most likely going to veer more toward growing flax and cotton and those sorts of things instead of growing wheat or carrots. But who knows, maybe you can still grow wheat and carrots. I just know that farming is a planned feature. Taking can be done by pretty much all classes. This is not something that is exclusive to crafting classes. So anyone who wants to do any sort of mining, gathering, farming, etc. will be able to do that. However, maybe some super crazy high-level resources will be exclusive to crafters, or at least more easily attainable for crafters. And there will also be some limited possibilities for automation within the taking process. And I don't really think they're talking about bots here. I think they're talking more about having some kind of magic ritual that harvests some wheat automatically, something like that. Next we have purifying, where you take all of your raw materials and you cut out all of the impurities and turn them into processed materials. At this stage you can also work at improving their quality, making them better for crafted items, and this is definitely something that is exclusive to crafters because it requires the Vox Megas to shape all of your raw materials into processed materials. Shaping, the next step, lets you take all of these processed materials and blend them together into pieces and parts that you are then going to need for the finished items. During this step, you're also going to be able to change a lot of the characteristics to how you would like them. Let's say you're making a sword and you want it to be really good for parrying and you want it to swing a little bit faster. Then you might take materials that increase those properties but aren't as good at dealing damage or any other property that these weapons might have. This is what you do during shaping. That's not something that's determined by the blueprint of the final item. The final item just kind of gives you the shape of what you are making, so like a sword, an axe, etc. And all of the characteristics of said weapon are going to be done during the shaping process. And then we have making, which is the last step of production, and it is the one that is most easily automated. Now, there is going to be some time sinks in crafting. Crafting is not going to be the conveyor belt of garbage that it is in games like World of Warcraft, where you make hundreds of items that nobody wants because they're all bad. Instead, you're going to make fewer items of a higher quality, items that people are really going to want to use. And in order to ensure a decent economy, because this crafting system is of course also meant to work into an economy. And you cannot have it that some player makes 300 swords and then suddenly there are 300 swords on the market and the supply is insane and the demand isn't that big and suddenly the market is crashed. Nobody can sell their swords anymore for anything and it's all a big terrible tragedy. And so the system they are going for is a little bit more restrictive on how much you can produce, but you have more influence and more input on what you do produce, and the quality of the items is higher. So this means that some of these crafting processes might take a few hours or maybe even days if it's something really amazing. And that is really just to stop you from making hundreds of them in a day and then dumping them all into your shop, etc, etc. And that is of course also why you have to be able to automate this process, because nobody in their right mind wants to stand there and watch an item be completed by the game over 4 hours. I'm guessing if you supervise the process, you can probably cut down a little bit on the time, or you're able to make some adjustments that make the item even better. Something like that. Who knows? That's not something we have specifics about yet. But expect a system where automation is going to be an option, but if you do stick with it and actively make the item, then it is maybe going to be better in some way, or there's going to be some kind of benefit, because that is what Camelot Unchained is all about. In every one of their systems, they are always working to have a risk versus reward. Now and then finally we have repairing and breaking. Repairing, once again, is not specific to crafter characters. Pretty much everyone is going to be able to do at least some basic field repairing. Crafters are probably going to do better repairs, but as we all know, your weapons usually do need repairs when there's no crafter around, so field repairs are always a good thing to have. And then finally breaking, which is once again something that crafters do with their Vox Megas. And breaking is where you can break previously built items or even broken items. Yes, items in Camelot Unchained can in fact break over prolonged usage into their basic materials so that they can be reused for future crafting processes. Alright guys, that is enough for part 1, and there's more to talk about when it comes to the crafting. So next episode, we are still going to talk about the crafting. But until then, I've been the CloakingDonkey, and I'll see you in another video.